Day 210 of the Ukrainian war map, also known as the day of Russia's declaration of partial military mobilization. Chelsea here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine today. And I'll get into the very big news of the day very shortly, but as always, I like to take a quick look at the stats in terms of Russian losses. I'll be very quick with this part today, but eliminations on the Russian military personnel side today, 55,110, so that's a decent 300 more than the previous day. And in terms of hardware losses on the Russian side, quite a few here as well. So we have armored combat vehicles, a whopping 24, tanks a massive 11, a huge amount of artillery 17, and even one aircraft. Now, just lastly, I'll do this very quickly as well for the purposes of today, but I'll show you my homegrown hobby of the Russian hardware captures there as well. And we'll jump back to the map here, but even before I get into the main article for the day, it's always best to give a little bit of map context. Where Ukraine liberated swaths of land in the last 2 to 3 weeks. Recently liberated areas are indicated in the blue, which is, in this case, a large chunk in the Kharkiv Oblast. Just to note, the green is the previously liberated territory, for instance around Kyiv, and the red is the Russian-occupied regions. So, as you can see, it was a painful loss for Russia recently to the north, Kharkiv Oblast. Though, interestingly, just prior to the Russian loss there, Ukraine publicly announced they would only mount a big offensive in the south, in the Kherson region. Then Russia took the bait, then the Ukrainian forces swooped up to the north, probably assisted by some very good satellite imagery intel showing the north was largely undefended by Russia. And the rest was history. Nearly 4,000 square kilometers of terrain, as you can see there, was taken back. And as a result of all that, we now have arguably some of the biggest news since the commencement of the Russo-Ukrainian War, where Russian President Vladimir Putin declared a partial military mobilization. Now, for those of you who don't know, a full military mobilization is where an assembly and organizing of the full strength and the military might of a country occurs, basically calling up all of the active duty military personnel and all of the reservists. Whereas this partial military mobilization that Putin has declared effectively gives Putin access to calling up a further 300,000 Russian military reservists who will get a month of training when or just before they jump into Ukraine. Now, to put all that in context, approximately 200,000 Russian forces have been involved in the conflict since February 24th, since the commencement of this war. And this figure may not even include shadow mobilization techniques used by the Russian government, including militia contract groups. Obviously, there's the Wagner group, among a few others, contracted ex-soldiers, and even prisoners, which has been well documented by this point now. So Russia was pretty well reported to be having a number of manpower issues, particularly in the last month or so, which makes perfect sense that Putin had to use a legal decree to enact additional infantry resources as of now. Now, the reasons given by Putin for this partial military mobilization are varied, and to be honest, some are somewhat strange. So, reasons given include freeing the Donbass, protecting Russia's sovereignty, to stop the West from physically invading the Russian motherland, so NATO forces and their allies, which would basically never happen, particularly when the West and NATO allies aren't directly provoked. And as Putin also put it, as a result of nuclear threats from the West. So Putin said there was some nuclear threats from the West, which is just absurd. I haven't seen any head of state politician in the West even hint at the idea of nuking Russia. I'm sure he found some third-rate politician from a mid-sized democratic country just going off their chops or saying something like that, but obviously having no power to do so, giving him a bit of justification from somewhere. And as you might expect, he also lightly touched on denazification of the neo-Nazis in the region as well, or supposedly in the region, right? Now, at the same time, there is also a UN General Assembly occurring, the UNGA, where both Biden and Zelensky are slotted to speak quite shortly, in fact, in about 12 hours from time of recording. Obviously, they'll change their speeches in light of this recent Russian news update, and I can all but guarantee they'll be using some particularly strong language, and we'll see that soon for sure. Now the question is, what does a partial military mobilization do for Russia? So it generally has no significant immediate impact. It won't conjure up a force of 300,000 Russian soldiers on the front line magically. Instead, it can be a lengthy process of training and getting the military-industrial complex ready. Also in this process, military-industry supply contractors ramp up their production of weaponry, vehicles, armor, ammunitions, you name it. It means the country is geared towards a more of a wartime economy, so focused on producing these military goods, usually at the partial expense of the civilians' quality of life in the country. Now, with all of this, I'm sure we'll see a lot of things happening soon. The good, the bad, and the downright wacky too. Just like on Russia's February 24th commencement of the invasion, when thousands of Russian military vehicles just became stuck in a literal convoy traffic jam for about 40 miles. That was in the north of Kyiv, that one in particular, that photo. You see, Russia's strong suit with regards to its military and war has always been artillery. So mindlessly firing shells towards the general direction of the enemy. But logistics and supply lines, not so much. And they proved that on nearly day one of the war, and continued proving poor logistics and supply mechanisms ever since. And speaking of that topic, calling up an additional few 100,000 reservists actually creates a previously non-existent logistical and supply issue again for the Russian warmongering machine. Such as, it's a lot of people to feed with 5 years expired rations, a lot of people to clothe with poor quality, suboptimal clothing, particularly as winter is coming around now as well. It's a lot of people to move from location A to location B many times over in an ever-changing battlefield scenario. It's also a lot of people to arm with 1800s musket rifles. Now, it's never good to speculate too far into the future, but I know we're going to see a whole bunch of truly odd things from the Russian forces soon. Things that will probably shed even more light on the ineptitude of the Russian industrial military complex, particularly by the corrupt military supply contractors that misappropriating their funding over many, many years, leading to some very poorly equipped soldiers, usually using legacy gear found in an old warehouse. Now, there's many aspects or ways to look at this whole thing here. Like, for instance, what shouldn't have Russia actually done? And I know they were too proud to do this, but many analysts say they should have stopped the invasion and taken a break very early on. So, and in fact, analyzed everything that went wrong and resolve their own military inefficiencies, probably by stamping out corruption where they could, although that's hard to do in any autocracy, over the course of about 5 or 10 years, getting to where they should be militarily, and then come back and finish the job, so to speak. But instead, they're doubling down, and there will be no shortage of fresh new Russian memes from the internet. And that's about the only thing I can say with certainty. Also, some analysts say on the topic of what Russia should have done in an alternative universe was to instead perform a full mobilization at the beginning of the year for any chance to take Ukraine and the Kyiv capital. Instead, they used up about 20% of their forces, many of which were wounded. Certainly quite a good amount were eliminated and were killed in action in the last 6 months. And as a result of that whole time of the first 6 months of the war, Russia reportedly used most of their modern firepower stockpiles and other various weaponry. And instead, they're not even mobilizing late. It's not even a full mobilization, I should say, just a partial one. It's probably important to mention at this point, Ukraine already declared a full mobilization on February 24th. And not just a military mobilization, but what they call a general mobilization, which means any able-bodied male from ages 18 to 60, which puts a pure soldier count from the Ukrainian perspective well into the millions. Now, they're not all engaged at the moment. You could consider them sort of reservists at the moment, but there is plenty there in comparison to what Russia has. Now, in all of this, Putin's back was to the wall, militarily speaking. He perhaps no longer trusted his advisors after the 3-day invasion has now been 7 months with no end in sight. Surely he also saw that he and Russia had become Ukraine's biggest arms supplier as well. I remember when I saw early into the war, maybe around March or April, the Russian forces had actually captured and taken video of capturing a couple of Javelin missiles. And that really irked me. That really got my goat. So I can only imagine if Putin stumbled online to YouTube, which isn't blocked yet in Russia, strangely, went on there and saw all of these captured T-80, T-90 tanks, T-72, B-3 variant tanks from Russia, quote-unquote donated, as I like to say, to the Ukrainian armed forces. That would really irk someone on that side. Now, only time will tell what will happen. If we were to actually look at the map, this is more of a map video cast, so there hasn't been a great deal of changes in the last day, a little bit on the Donbass front line, and if I was just to quickly zoom in, I'm not going to get into this in any I guess really thorough way today, just because of the new major news that occurred. But if we look at the Lehman area and we go back and forward a day, we can see actually a couple of changes there. So pushing forward to the Lehman location with the Orky Pigs / Oinky Pigs, and the Ukrainian forces are also getting closer to Lysychansk right there, which was taken, probably the biggest take from the Russian side back in late June. So Ukraine is keen to take that one back for sure. Not a great deal otherwise. A little bit on the more unconfirmed territory gains on the north side of the Kherson Oblast north bank there. So always good to see. So that's pretty much it, guys. Like I say, changing up the format today, given probably the biggest news since the commencement of the war. There's many angles to look at this, and I haven't obviously discussed all of them. That would take probably hours, not the least of which is the upcoming referenda in the Donbass, or the Donetsk and the Luhansk People's Republic regions, where they may do a referenda to vote yes to be annexed into the Russian Federation, which is a bit of a sham all around, considering Russia hasn't even captured the entirety of the Donbass. But yeah, we'll keep it at that for now. Thanks for watching. Please leave a comment, subscribe. I don't usually look forward to what the trolls will say in the comments, but to be honest, I'm actually looking forward to what they'll say today. So not a great situation, obviously. It's bad for both sides. Bad for the Russian forces, Ukrainian forces. Nobody wins in war. But thanks again, and I hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Leave me a comment and a like. Thanks.